hamburgers are quite similar to the ones they have at Krusty Burger.
Oh, no. Patented Skinner Burgers. Old family recipe.
4 steamed hams.
Yeah.
Yes, and you call them steamed hams despite the fact they are obviously grilled.
You know, one thing Excuse me for 1 second.
Of course.
Oh, well, that was wonderful. Good time was had by all. I'm pooped.
Yes, I should be. Good Lord, what is happening in there?
Aurora Borealis?
Aurora Borealis. At this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within your kitchen.
Yes.
That's it?
No.
Seymour! The house is on fire!
No, Mother, it's just the Northern Lights.
Well, Seymour, you are an odd fellow, but I must say, you steam a good ham.
Help! Help!
Welcome back to the Astrocast. Today is Wednesday, November 12th, 2025. And yes, as you may have heard, Aurora Borealis has happened once again. I am your host, Drew. Thank you so much for tuning in to join us this week. Always happy to have you and happy to be back for another wonderful week of chatting about all things Astro. It's been an extremely busy week for me in this past week. We've had some pretty crazy weather events happening here in the Carolinas over the last week. So Monday night, we had a cold front come through, and we all knew this cold front was coming and that it was going to get very, very cold, unseasonably cold. In fact, we normally don't see, weather down into the 20s or even 30s until January. But we got down into the 20s on Monday. And in fact, it snowed on Monday, which is just really unheard of. I saw the weatherman, our local meteorologist, Brad Panovich, posted that it has not snowed in November this early in like 30 years in Charlotte. So yeah, it is exceedingly rare for it to snow this early. Obviously, after that occurred, we had something even crazier occur. Last night, we had the Aurora Borealis occur. Now, I had seen some posts earlier in the day from several people stating that it might be a big one. Unfortunately, I was not able to hop in the car and drive 3 hours north like I would love to do, just because we had plans for today that have to do with adoption. And I knew I couldn't, sleep in all day like I normally would after a night out like that. But I did take the best advantage I could, and obviously went out last night and took some photos, was able to capture some of the red aurora at least, and definitely got into the Discord with everybody for a while last night and saw all of the just incredible images that you guys were able to capture. So absolutely beautiful, breathtaking images from all over the country. Very, very far south. I haven't seen the record yet for how far south it went, but it was a KP9, which is, as high as it gets on the KP scale. So very big storm, the biggest one we've had since the May 10th, 2024 storm. And that date is forever etched in my mind. I skipped over the moon at the beginning of the episode because of the aurora, but I figured I would mention we're at a 45% waning crescent moon. So we are closing in on new moon. It's rising later and later. And this is the time of the moon cycle where you're much more likely to see the moon out during the day. And if you're particularly ignorant from a very special subset of the human race, you might say, why is the moon out during the day? What's going on? But in reality, the moon is out half of the time during the day and then half of the time during the night, as most of you know, I am quite sure. In other not so wonderful news, since my neighbors next door moved out, it looks like the leasing company has come by and decided to turn on pretty much every outdoor light that they have and just leave them on because, that's what you do, apparently. You just leave all the lights on, and surely that will keep intruders out because, it's not obvious that no one's home when there's not a car in the driveway every night for a month. It's a very safe neighborhood. It's very silly to do things like this, and I don't understand why humans do things like this. It doesn't deter thieves. If anything, it just makes it easier for them to see what they're trying to do if someone was indeed trying to do something. But never fear, light bulbs unscrew easy enough. So I didn't go into their backyard just because I'm not going to be that guy who sneaks into someone's backyard in the middle of the night. But I did last night when I was trying to photograph some of the aurora from the front yard. I did go to the front porch and just unscrew that one light bulb that was blindingly bright off of the eastern side of my view, which is a shame because I really don't want to do that. But no one lives there yet, so it's not like I can knock on the door and say, hey, would you mind turning your lights off for a couple hours while I blah, blah, blah. The more it happens, the more it makes me just dread light pollution in general. I'm trying to think of something that we can do, like a project, an ongoing project for the show, something we can do to start really fighting light pollution together. Obviously, it's kind of, the message behind the show. If we have one, it's about fighting light pollution. And I don't know, I'm kicking around ideas in my head. If any of you guys have any good ideas for something that we could do as a community to help fight light pollution, I'm all about it. Please feel free to shoot me an email at rue@theastrocast.com. A couple of other things that I just want to mention before we get into today's topic. I wanted to give a shout out to our long-term sponsor of the show. That is, of course, Dark Dragons Astronomy. And I wanted to mention Dark Dragons, obviously, they are the roll-off roof observatory experts, but they actually have some other products as well. And we were talking a couple weeks ago about motorized flat panels on the show. And a new member of the Discord and Patreon, John, actually was sharing his homemade motorized flat panel with us. And it's very impressive. And I love it. It's really great. But the guys over at Dark Dragons messaged me and they just reminded me that they actually have an app on the Apple App Store. So if you're someone who maybe isn't inclined to build your own motorized panel, but you have an iPad like a lot of people do, they actually they sell an app called Dragon Light Mobile, and I'm going to put a link for the app in the show notes. It's $9.99. It is great. It basically turns your iPad into an infinitely adjustable flat panel. So that way you don't have to go out and buy another one. If you already have an iPad sitting around, then you already have a great flat panel. So I just wanted to mention that just because it is something that I have mentioned on the show, though it's been a very long time since I've mentioned it, because I actually went back to an Android tablet for a while, and now I'm back to an iPad. And since there was talk of flat panels recently, Jeff reached out to me and he said, hey, Rue, did you forget about the Dragon Light Mobile flat panel app? So I just wanted to mention that. Definitely give it a look. And of course, you can check out Dark Dragon's website in the show notes if you have any need for help with your roll-off roof observatory. Those guys are experts with getting those handled. Also, want to take a moment. James from Leviathan Optics, who sent out the long-term review unit for their incredible light pollution filter. He actually joined the Discord today, the Patreon. He's a supporter now. So I just wanted to take a moment and thank you. Also want to thank John, another new member of the Discord. I can't remember if I thanked you last week or not. People are joining so fast these days. It's hard to remember from one week to the next who I thanked and who I didn't. But thank you guys both for joining the Patreon. It means a lot to have your support. James, me and you have talked for a long time. I really love what you're doing with high-end filters for one-shot color cameras. Keep it up, man. I'm going to get you that data from the Heart Nebula so you can use it for comparisons. I do have some similar data with my L Pro that you can use as well if you'd like to. Use it however you please. I'll get that over to you this weekend. So shout out to those guys. Welcome to the Astrocast family. John, you have some incredible stuff, man, for being new to the relatively new to the hobby, if I remember correctly. You've got quite the setup going and are already doing amazing work. So keep that up, sir. Certainly happy to have you as a member. So the group got talking this week and they started talking about drizzling. And boy, oh boy, have y'all opened a can of worms. So I thought I understood a good deal about drizzling before this week. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And if any of you have gone down this rabbit hole before, then you might be like me and starting to actually understand a lot more about astronomy and astrophotography. So I guess I would say before we start on today's main topic, I would encourage you to go down this rabbit hole if you are really looking to kind of deepen your understanding of some of the numbers that you often see in Nina or ASI Air or whatever device it is that you may own and use while doing astrophotography. We'll get into all that more, but you will start to understand a lot more about things like seeing and arc seconds per pixel and what full width half maximum means and what different scales are for resolution and why it makes more sense to be undersampled than oversampled and why you can drizzle in certain circumstances and not in others, and why you need to dither in order to drizzle, and why if you have not dithered, drizzling is a complete waste of time. That's something that I didn't know before last week, for example. Now, I always dither with my images. I think the only exception would be if I'm like at a really dark sky location and I've got a camera, and it's usually just a camera because I've got 2 star trackers now, set up on a tripod, just taking, static images of the Milky Way that I'm going to stack later. But even then, I would encourage you to manually dither. And that can be as simple as physically moving your camera 1 or 2 degrees left or right. You can, get a ball head that lets you turn it on the horizontal axis, and a lot of them actually have 360 degrees marks on them, and you can move it 1 or 2 degrees to the left and then 1 or 2 degrees to the right every few minutes. And just something as simple as that will allow you to use, dithering and therefore drizzling, which might be really important if you're doing ultra wide field Milky Way imaging, as we will come to learn, because in those circumstances, if you are using a camera which has larger pixels, which typically DSLRs or mirrorless cameras often will, that is the kind of time when you would want to drizzle, because your stars are going to end up being very, very small on the pixel scale. So needless to say, we're going to get thick this week. We're going to get deep into it. And I hope I can get all of this information out and get it out on time. You'll have to bear with me, and I apologize in advance if I say something wrong or get something completely wrong. I apologize. I will say a couple weeks ago on the show, I said longitude like 5 times, and I should have said latitude. I realized that afterwards when I was listening to the episode. My bad for that. You'll probably hear a lot worse on this one. But I will do my best to keep things on a straight edge as best I can. So before we get into the why you would want to drizzle, why don't we get into kind of the background of it? why does Drizzle even exist? And it's actually a pretty interesting story. I didn't realize where it had come from. I didn't realize it had such an interesting background up until a couple of weeks ago when I started doing a little bit more research on this. The first time I ever heard of drizzling was whenever I, got pretty deep into astrophotography and found the button in PixInsight that allowed me to drizzle at 2x or 4x or, whatever it was that I chose. So I had assumed that, some nerd out there had figured out how to combine images in a better way and just decided to call it drizzling. But the reality is actually much more interesting than that. And indeed, a lot of nerds had to work together to come up with this particular solution. So as most good space stories start, it involves the Hubble telescope. So I'm sure a lot of you know in the history of the Hubble that there was a problem with the initial lenses, that essentially it was blurry. So they had to, without getting too deep into details, they had to make glasses for the Hubble. And they made a special mission to go up and correct the lenses. And that was great. And it did indeed correct the lenses. But later on down the line, the lesser known crisis that the Hubble ran into, and don't ask me how they didn't know about this ahead of time, because nowadays we have tools, you can go to a website, which we'll talk about in a little while, astronomy.tools, that allow you to calculate these things on the fly. But mistakes happen, and I'm not even about to sit here and critique the scientists that work on the Hubble, because they've done incredible work. In any case, they realized after they had put the glasses on the Hubble to correct its image that they were terribly undersampled. And what that means, let's first define what undersampled means, because we're going to say undersampled and oversampled quite a bit in this episode. And it's really important that you really truly understand what that means. So sampling is basically the process of picking up signal, right? So you're recording a signal, and that can be audio, it can be video, it can be photos, anything can be sampled. And essentially it's how well you are able to sample it, right? And if you are undersampling, that means that you are not grabbing enough of the signal to properly reconstruct it. And the reason that this would happen with a telescope and a camera in particular would be that the telescope is able to resolve details very, very finely, but the camera is not able to resolve those very fine details. So in this particular case, think about it like this. The Hubble Space Telescope was able to resolve down to 0.05 arc seconds or better, okay? But the camera itself could only resolve down to 0.1 arc seconds. So essentially what happened was the telescope could see a lot better than the camera could record. And what that would lead to is essentially blurry images or blocky stars, because there aren't enough pixels to properly render that image as it is recorded. All right, I'm going to define all this stuff a little bit better later on in the episode, but I thought all week about how to explain this in layman terms, the simplest way. And I think I've thought of a pretty good way to explain undersampling. So here's what I want you to do. Think about it like this. Let's take an average camera. Okay, let's take a DSLR camera, like let's say a Rebel T5 camera. Okay. And then we're going to hook it up to an average 80 millimeter telescope. Okay. And we'll say it's got a 400 millimeter focal length. Okay. And you take a 10-second exposure through that telescope. And then you look at the image on your computer and you're able to clearly see, let's assume that you focused it correctly, and let's assume that you have good seeing wherever you are. And you're able to clearly see all of the stars, and they have definition and you can see them clearly. You can see, the roundness. If you zoom in all the way in on them, you can see that the stars take up multiple pixels each, at least the big stars. Let's assume we're pointing at something like Orion's belt, and you've got like Alnitak in the frame. So you've got a big, quote unquote, close by star in the frame that you can clearly make out. Okay. And it's big enough to where there are multiple pixels being shown within this one star. Now let's take that same camera and let's put a extremely wide angle lens on it. Okay. So let's take like an 8mm lens, fisheye lens, something that can literally capture the entire night sky in one shot. Okay. And then let's center up that same star, Alnitak, right in the middle of the frame and snap that image. 10 seconds, exact same exposure. And then let's put it on your computer. And then you're going to zoom all the way in on that star. And what are you going to see? You'll still see the star, yes, but it will not be clearly defined. It will not be round and made up of several pixels. If you're lucky, it'll be made up of a couple of pixels, right? Because you're capturing so much in that one image that the sensor can't possibly render all of those stars in that fine of detail. You would need something with, thousands of megapixels in order to do that. And that is what makes telescopes like what the ESA just built down in the Southern Hemisphere at the Vera Rubin Observatory. That is kind of a great example of how you can very, very much handle sampling in an incredible way if you have the resources to do it. So as we know, the Vera Rubin has just an absurdly large sensor on it. It's actually a combination of sensors that make up a 3.2 gigapixel sensor. So it's an array of nearly 200 CCD sensors that are each 16 megapixels, and its field of view is going to be equivalent to about a 50mm lens on a full frame camera. So that would not be undersampled, obviously, because you have so many megapixels in that shot that they're able to zoom into a ridiculous degree. In fact, the focal length, technically speaking, is over 10,000 millimeters if you get down to brass tacks, but they are able to shoot at like 3x3 degrees in the night sky. But obviously, none of us have 3,200 megapixel cameras with 50mm lenses that are 10 meters wide. So what we do have are our trusty Red Cats and SQA 55s and our micro 4/3 or APS-C size sensors. And luckily for us, most of these pair up fairly well together. Now, there are a lot of cases that I have found where, generally speaking, you'll be in okay to somewhat not great seeing with a lot of the common combinations that you will see. Like, for example, I plugged in my SQA 55 and my 2600 MC Pro, and it's kind of on the edge of what you would call undersampled. It would be a great candidate for drizzling, because when we do drizzling, it actually is able to use data that we gather from dithered images, and I'll explain how in a little bit here, to essentially upscale that image in such a way that we can recover faint details that we otherwise couldn't. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because back to the Hubble. So when astronomers first started using the Hubble Space Telescope, they were running into a weird problem. So the telescope's earliest cameras had pixels that were just a little bit too large to capture pinpoint light of distant stars. So what that meant in practice was that every image would come out slightly undersampled. And essentially that would lead to details of really distant galaxies and nebulae getting blurred out or lost between pixels. And this included blocky stars for the really distant small stars, as well as the smaller galaxies and nebulae. So that wasn't a flaw in the Hubble's optics, though. It was just literally a limit of our sensor technology at the time. So this is really where the genius came in of the scientists that were working and experimenting with different techniques at the time. So they had been using a technique called dithering for years, and like they were using it for different reasons. One of them was because there were spaces in between different CCD sensors that would need to be accounted for, and you would need to nudge the telescope very slightly in between images. But in any case, they would basically take several photos of the same patch of the night sky and nudge the telescope just a fraction of a pixel each time, very similar to what we do now. And that very small shift would mean that when you looked at it across all of the exposures that they had taken, that light fell very slightly differently on different spots of the sensor itself. So later on, the engineers could then carefully align and recombine the offset images, and essentially they could reconstruct what the telescope would have seen with smaller, sharper pixels. So it's not fake data. It's data that is there, and the offset combined data that they have because they dithered. So the data is there. You just have to get it in between the offset images. So they came up with the nickname drizzling at that point, and that was what allowed them to ultimately recover the lost detail and sharpen those faint objects. And at no point ever to this very day did it invent any fake data. So when you drizzle, you aren't creating fake pixels out of nothing. You are literally using interlaced data from the separated images that you dithered to essentially make a new image that is sharper because of that data that you have. Now, ultimately, it became an absolute cornerstone of how the Hubble processes images and still is to this day. And obviously that worked its way down to us as astronomers at home. And indeed, we often use this technique ourselves. I have been experimenting with drizzling more and more often. I will say, after reading everything that I have on drizzling and starting to understand things like star sharpness and full width half maximum values and focusing and drizzling and dithering, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Knowing the things that I know now, and knowing that I generally have okay seeing, which is, in the realm of 2 to 4 arc seconds in my night sky where I am in Charlotte, North Carolina. And that's on a good night, to be honest. With the combination that I currently use, it definitely makes sense for me to drizzle. So I would say for the vast majority of people, if you are using a wide field refractor and you're combining it with something like an ASI 2600 MC or Pro, it definitely makes sense to drizzle your images. And I really think if you've ever wondered why you see some images with the same gear that you have and the sharpness of the image just completely blows you away, and you're just like, how on earth are they getting this level of detail and sharpness and this nebulosity? That's your answer right there. They're drizzling. So, and it can be to different degrees, and we will get into that here shortly, because there are trade-offs as far as how deep you want to go and how much you want to drizzle. There's a limit to how much return you can get for your investment as far as how much data and how much processing, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, you will most likely want to drizzle if you're even slightly undersampled. And there's a tool that you can use to very quickly figure this out. And you can learn the math behind it as well. They'll actually teach you the equation that they use to calculate this if you'd like to do it yourself. But if you go to astronomy.tools, and then at the top of the page, click on calculators, and then go to CCD suitability, and then scroll down to the bottom of that page. They have several different menus that you can select from, and they will let you input the make and model of your telescope and camera, and then you can make changes to focal length, pixel size, if you're using a Barlow or a reducer, if you are binning your image, and you can change the seeing amount, and you can actually figure out how to calculate your seeing, which is, again, full width, half maximum. And again, this is something that you can calculate during the focusing process with your ASI Air or Nina. The number that it is reading out to you while it is focusing, I found out that is your full width, half maximum. That's the number that it's calculating. The smaller, the better. And once I got a better telescope with sharper optics, my number was smaller. Go figure. I actually was able to get it down to like 1.9 for the first time ever. Before that, I always saw like 2.3, 2.4 on a good night. You know what I mean? But once I got a quintuplet astrograph, I took that down by nearly half an arc second, which is a lot. So what you'll notice is if you're in the range like I am with a wide field refractor, and you're using a camera that's like somewhere in the range of a micro four thirds to an APS-C size sensor with okay seeing, it's probably going to be, slightly undersampled. And the better your seeing becomes, the worse that sampling is going to be, because your full width half maximum is going to get smaller and smaller, and those details are going to become more and more apparent. So like I say, I could probably talk about this particular subject for 5 episodes, and it would certainly be interesting to talk about. But I would really encourage you to go online and start reading about this. You can look up history of the Hubble. You can look up how dithering and drizzling was invented. I would say that is a great place to start. I didn't even know before I started researching this that dithering and drizzling were inherently connected. You have to dither to have drizzled images. If you don't dither, there's literally no point, because the way that drizzling works is by using dithered images, because it records or it recombines data that is gathered between dithered images and pixels. So definitely look into that. And what I'm going to talk about next is, how you actually do this in PixInsight and how much space it takes up, what level you can go to, whether it's like 2x or 4x, and what that means exactly to your image at the end of the day. All right. So one of the first things that you're going to need to consider if you're going to start using drizzled images on a normal basis is that they are going to take up a lot more space than non-drizzled images, especially if you're using a larger sensor camera like an ASI 2600 like I have recently acquired. These are already fairly, large sensors that take up a pretty large amount of space per sub. And whenever you enable drizzling, you are essentially multiplying the amount of pixels depending on, how far you want to go. And we'll get into that shortly. But needless to say, you're going to need anywhere from twice to, depending on how far you want to go, 10 times as much storage for each working session. And I figure a good example here would be to give like a standard kind of a one night session that I recently did to give you an idea of the difference in scales of data that we're talking about. So in this case, I am using M42. So I recently took almost 100 light frames of the Great Nebula in Orion. Welcome back, Orion. So it's 96 frames with the 2600 MC Pro. That total integration time is 4 hours and 48 minutes. They are 180-second frames. I also have darks, flats, and biases, of course. You absolutely want to use darks, flats, and biases. Calibration frames are a whole different discussion. We're going to have a similar episode on flats very soon because we've had a lot of discussion on flats. And I know I talked about it a little bit a couple of weeks ago, but we're going to get even more in depth on calibration frames in the near future. So just to give you an idea of the type of space that we're working with, whenever you load up all of your frames into PixInsight using the weighted batch pre-processing script, before you go, after you press run, it will actually give you a summary of exactly how much disk space is needed for the project itself. So in this case, between calibrated lights, debear, registration, local normalization, and master lights, we are looking at a total working space of just under 67 gigabytes. So that's 67 gigabytes for 100 frames on an ASI 2600 MC Pro. Now, keep in mind, that's a pretty conservative project. That's just one night on one target. If you're anything like me, you might be doing multiple nights on one target, or, you could have a project like the Pleiades project that I recently did where it was 45 hours on one target. Or you could be like Parrish or Justin and have 100+ hours on one target if you're running a remote rig. So the space requirements can quickly become quite high. And you need to keep that in mind, because if you do this on a fast drive like an SSD, like an M.2 drive, it's going to go infinitely faster in processing. Whereas if you do it on a platter drive, like a standard, hard drive, HDD, whatever you want to call it, it is going to take longer, obviously, significantly longer, in fact, but they are a lot cheaper. You can get a 16 terabyte hard disk drive for the same price as a 4 terabyte M.2 drive in a lot of cases. So there are trade-offs and considerations to be made in every area. I would say at a minimum, if I was going to start drizzling, I would want to have like a 2 terabyte M.2 SSD. That's just me personally, and your mileage may vary. I'm not saying that you can't get away with a smaller drive. You may be able to. And there's nothing saying that you can't, do each night individually as one project and then stack all those together. But that's just going to require a lot more manual cleanup. That's another thing you'll have to consider. You'll need to be able to clean up and back up data, especially if you want to keep all of your individual subframes. For that sort of thing, you can absolutely use a regular HDD, like slow kind. It's cheaper. It's reliable for long-term storage. So I would absolutely recommend going that route for just saving the files. But when you're actually working with them and processing them, you want to do it on an SSD because it's just so much faster. All right. So when we're going through these numbers, one thing that I really want you to keep in mind is we're not just doing upscaling whenever we are drizzling. That's not what we're doing. We're reconstructing information. It's not just a standard numerical upscaling. And that's really important to keep in mind because drizzling, again, as we said earlier, it does not introduce fake elements in and, say, here's a pixel, let's turn it into 6 pixels instead. That is not what it does. And I really suggest that you read up more on it if I didn't explain it well enough earlier. But I do want to go over, what a 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x, what the differences will be ultimately in sizes if you decide to drizzle an image. So the native resolution on a 2600 MC Pro is 6248 by 4176. So technically speaking, that would be a 1x drizzle baseline. You wouldn't really check drizzle and then select 1x because you're not really doing anything at that point. You would want to, at a minimum, select a drizzle scale of 2, 3, or even 4. Now, if you do go to 4, you are going to make a much larger image, and therefore the size is going to get incredibly large very quick. So just to give you an idea, if you go with a 2x scale, you are going to have 4 times as many pixels in your image. So you go from, roughly 6,000 by 4,000 to 12,496 by 8,352. So you're already talking about, doubling the size of the image and 4 times as many pixels, which is obviously massive. Now, if you're following along, 3x is going to be 9 times as many pixels. And that's going to get you from 6,200 by 4,100 to roughly 18,000 by 12,000 pixels. And then finally, if you so dare and you actually have the room to do it and the RAM to do it for that matter, you at 4x, you would have 16 times as many pixels, which essentially takes you to a 417 megapixel image, which is 24,992 by 16,704 pixel resolution. That is, definitely a lot. So just to go from 1x to 4x, you go from 26 megapixels to 417 megapixels. So as you can see, it's an exponential scale here when we're going up, this curve. So with all that being said, I would strongly recommend that you start with 2x. It's really the sweet spot for most undersampled setups. If you're in that image scale of, 1.5 to 2 arc seconds per pixel, generally speaking, a 2x drizzle is really going to make your image much sharper without really, losing any of the fidelity, which sometimes some people describe the images as being kind of crunchy whenever you over drizzle it. A 3x would really be if it's like heavily undersampled. We're talking about like tiny 1 pixel stars. And you would really have to have excellent guiding and great dithering to even make a 3x drizzle worthwhile. 4x drizzle, don't even bother. Frankly, it's for academics only. There is really no reason for you other than to just test and see if your rig can do it. There's really no reason for you to do this at home. If you're using something like a 2600 MC Pro and a wide field rig like a Red Cat or a SQA55 like I have, you're not going to see any benefit at the end of the day except in absolutely enormous file size, which we'll get into here in just a moment whenever it's finally done processing. So yeah, if we take the scale that we're going to multiply this by, if we're talking 60 gigabytes for the 96 images that we were referencing earlier, and we do a 2x drizzle, we basically go to 240 gigabytes at that point, because remember, it's 4 times as many pixels. So you're taking the original 60 gigabytes and multiplying that by 4, which would be 240 gigabytes. Now, if we go 3x on that, we take the 60 gigabytes and multiply it by 9 because it's to the third power, right? So 540 gigabytes. You can see how this quickly starts getting out of hand. And then 4x would, of course, be 16 times as much data, which brings us up to 960 gigabytes, which is, nearly a terabyte of storage for just, 5 hours worth of data, which is really insane to think about. God forbid you have a week-long project that you're working on processing. So I say all that to tell you, I would highly recommend 2x if you want to mess around with it and your dithering is very on point. 3x is fine. I also looked into, what sort of dithering we should be doing as far as in the settings and your guiding settings, you can choose how far to dither and how often. And this was a question that I always kind of wondered about myself. I said, should I dither on every single frame? And, what's the trade-off like as far as, obviously you got to wait for your mount to settle after every single dither. But really what we want is about 20 to 30 different unique positions on each channel per night. So in other words, you want to have 20 to 30 different dithers per night. So if you were doing 90 images in one night, every 3 images would be perfectly fine for dithering. And in fact, most of the time, if you're doing, 180 second subs or thereabouts, 120 to 5 minute subs, let's say, you should be fine with every 2 or 3 subframes. Now, the only time you would really want to dither on every single frame is if you start getting into really, really short subframes. I'm not going to really get into the why behind that because I don't think too many of us do super short frames. But needless to say, you will want to dither every 2 to 3 frames. I will say, don't waste your time dithering on every single frame because it does add on a lot of extra wasted time. I mean, you go on 100 frames, you go from, assuming that you have a quick, fast settle, you can go from 7 minutes if it's every 3 subs of wasted time to 21 minutes. And, that's time that you could spend imaging, which is much better to have. Now, the scale should be about 3 to 5 pixels. And I believe that is somewhere in the range of what the ASI Air picks by default. And that's if, obviously on the guide cam that we're talking about. And you should be able to pick that out in the settings themselves. So the idea, though, is to basically get a very diverse group of offsets throughout the entire night. And another advantage of this is it makes it much easier for you to use multi-night data. If you dither frequently, you're able to crush things like walking noise that would otherwise creep in if you're imaging the same image night over night, but hitting it from the exact same frame over and over and over. When all of us first got started in astrophotography, I would imagine walking noise is something that you saw at some point and you said, wait a minute, I need an equatorial mount. And then you were like, wait a minute, I still see walking noise. And that's when you learned about dithering, right? Well, the reason why we dither has more to do with things like walking noise, but obviously it has a huge impact on things like drizzling as well. So if we can continue to make sure that we, at the end of each night have somewhere between 20 and 30 different areas that dither has landed in, then ultimately that should leave us with phenomenal data that we can then drizzle later on in PixInsight and end up with a really, really sweet looking image. And I probably won't be able to have it done before I'm done recording this episode, but I have some really great data from the Heart Nebula that I took a couple months ago using the Leviathan Optics Spectral Pro. It's an awesome filter that I've been using quite a bit lately. And I did indeed dither on all of those subs. Well, every third sub, I should say. And I want to go through and drizzle that image because I really like that image, but I do feel like it could be a little bit sharper in some of the areas. So that would be a perfect example for a before and after. And then obviously I'll be happy to share that on the Facebook page with you guys if you'd like to check that out. By the way, please feel free to stop by on the Facebook page and say hello. We've had a lot of new people stopping by lately. I absolutely love that. We've had some people post photos on there, people sharing pictures of the merch that they've ordered. If you want to check that out, we actually just got hats and beanies available at the store. If you go to theastrocast.com, currently it will redirect you to qcru.com, but you can just click on store there and check out all the merch. We got shirts, hoodies, and hats now. So we got beanies and hats. So if you want to pick one up, please do. And every one of those purchases goes to help support keeping the Astrocast ad free. So thanks so much for your support as always in that regard. Yeah, you guys know what time it is.
Social media stardust.
It's our week 2 winner announcement for Social Media Stardust. So it took me a while. I was looking over the last several days. And I actually found one, I believe it was last night. It was either last night or early this morning when I was out under the stars. This is a really cool one. I like this. It shows progress. It shows a place where I know I have been on a challenging target before. And I respect that a lot. And you can tell that this person has been putting in the effort. And I just want to say you're doing an excellent job. So this week's award is going to go to Matthew Sunken for his work on the Elephant Trunk Nebula. So he says he's been working on the target for several weeks. He's working on multi-session processing in Cyril. He wanted to get away from the hydrogen alpha red dominated image, which is really easy to happen on this particular nebula. I understand that. He is making good progress. He used a Red Cat 61 and a 2600 MC Pro. Looks like an L Ultimate AM5, an autofocuser. He uses 100, 300 second lights and then calibration frames aplenty, which I'm very happy to see. So congratulations to you, Matthew. You'll be entered into this year's drawing for the winner. Like I say, we're going to give away $100 to the winner, and then whatever I can get the sponsors to scrounge up, I'll announce that as we get it. But I hope you keep it up, man. You're doing a great job. The image is excellent. I think I'd be very happy with that if I were you. So definitely keep up the good work. Recommendations this week. I've got a fun one for you guys. Now, this is one that kind of hit me by surprise, but I've been very pleasantly surprised with it. Something that I got into, when I was probably 18, 19 years old, before the last book came out, but after the first few were out, I picked up the first Harry Potter book when I was probably 18. And I want to say that they had gotten to maybe Goblet of Fire, because I remember picking up Order of the Phoenix new at the store. And then obviously Half-Blood Prince and the Deathly Hallows. I got to read those on release week when they dropped. But yeah, so Audible has actually released a full audio cast version of the first book. And indeed, they will be releasing every book with a full audio cast. And I'm talking like over 100 characters in each book, and very, very well done casting on these. Like when you hear Draco with his little laughs when he's picking on Harry and stuff, I'm just like, man, they nailed this. Dumbledore sounds great. Hagrid sounds great. I kind of wonder if they got some of the actors from the movies to do the voices, because like Hagrid, he sounds so much like the actors to me. But some of the others, you can tell it's not the original actors, but I think it's better for it, honestly, because it kind of gives it its own unique spin. And if you haven't read the books and you've only seen the movies and really enjoyed them, but maybe you're not a book person, this is a perfect time for you to finally get to enjoy the books and read them all. And you won't have to wait, a year between each release, because literally each month for the next 6 months, they're going to be coming out with the next book. So I'm definitely hooked. I'm almost done with the first one already, and I just got it last week. The first one's not that long. I only want to say it's like 10 hours long or something along those lines, but phenomenal reads / listens. So can't recommend that enough. I know that the author is a little bit controversial these days, but I kind of feel like some artists' work rise above the artists themselves and become, cultural icons in their own rights. And I definitely think Harry Potter and the whole Hogwarts world definitely has gotten to that level. So if you're a fan, definitely give that a listen. So I think that's going to just about do it for us this week, guys. I hope that this has given you a little bit more insight into drizzling. I know there's still so much more we could talk about on this. And frankly, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. Maybe we will do another episode and talk about it more. And I will definitely revisit this topic after I've processed some of the data. Maybe next week I can give you guys an update on where everything stands as far as the Orion image that I was working on while we were talking, and then the Heart Nebula image as well, because I definitely want to show you before and afters, and then you can judge for yourself. In fact, if you have any before and afters that you've done with and without drizzling, feel free to send them in to me. I would love to see them. You can send them to rue@theastrocast.com. And if you would like to continue the conversation, you can join us in the members only Discord. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/theastrocast. And then finally, I would say in the show notes, we have links to all of our affiliate partners. And every time you make a purchase using one of those links, just a small part of the profits comes to the show. It's not a huge amount, but every single sale helps, and they help me keep the show ad free, which is always going to be number one importance to me. So thank you guys so much for tuning into the Astrocast this week. I'm your host, Drew. It's been wonderful. We'll be back next week with an all new episode. But until then, as always, clear skies.